This is Politics Tonight, everyone. Thank you very much for staying with us. Tonight we're dissecting Niger Republic outburst against Nigeria and ECOWAS future. And I've been speaking with Professor Abiodun Adeniyi, Professor of Communications Studies, Bayes University. Prof, thank you very much for staying with us on the program. Now let's expand this conversation. A decision has now been made on whether or not Mali, Burkina Faso and Niger would be accommodated back into the region. What we know for now is that these three countries will stop being members of the ECOWAS from January 29, 2025, going by Article 91 of ECOWAS Treaty. But a duration of 6 months has been given from 29th of January to 29th of July to reconsider their decision to exit the bloc. Now, what is the overall impact of this on the regional body, mobility and integration of the bloc?
Well, I think it's not really very strange. Once more, if you look at it critically, you know they are just acting from the position of being hemmed at the level of ideology, governance ideology that is, you know, once more at the level of a regime that is losing steam in global affairs. And before they took their decision, you'll be aware, you remember the ECOWAS hierarchy, you know, had been very forthcoming in sending representatives to these countries to return to democracy. And they were actually dilly-dallying, delaying ECOWAS mysteries, you know, trying to reduce the importance of those visits until they finally decided to exit the bloc, you know, forming, you know, an imprecise alliance of Sahel states, a kind of novel association that may just probably have a presence, but may not have a future, as the case could be. It's not something I believe will really last. It's just a stopgap measure to shield themselves from the pressure tactics, the rightful pressure tactics of ECOWAS, trying to get them back to democracy. And of course, perhaps if we want to put it in a primitive way, they just want to enjoy the spoils of power as much as possible, you know, without thinking of handing over, without thinking of constitutional democracy. And of course, they've seen ECOWAS as a body that is trying to push them to do otherwise, you know. So the easy, primitive way for them, action for them to take is to say they are pulling out. But against that bargain as well, you cannot we cannot imagine any other way that ECOWAS can intervene other than to appeal to reason, you know, to make them, you know, to change their minds, considering a shared history once again, and how the body has been together over many years. This is the first time we are having three countries pulling out at once. The first time it happened was Mauritania. But even at that, Mauritania sought to come back, and it was readmitted in observer status. But for three countries to pull out at once, it's actually a new dimension to it, but it's also not a dimension that cannot be, not an unfortunate dimension that cannot be surmounted. Now, how can ECOWAS surmount it? We made the diplomatic error of threatening to attack them to enforce democracy. That's fine. We never carried out that threat. That's okay. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that as well. Sometimes in policy making and pronouncement, you may make a statement or you may make a projection, then you beat a retreat, you know. It just shows that reasoning, superior reasoning has prevailed. And I'm sure that was what happened. That was what Nigeria and maybe ECOWAS did as a whole. But going forward, you know, there's nothing much ECOWAS can do other than to continue to appeal, and just hoping again that they would not, those three countries will not plunge their countries into deeper crisis, because we know that military regimes is often, you know, embedded in different levels of acrimony, because there might be other interest group from among them, you know, that feels, you know, that resents the presence of a particular set of people. And oftentimes, what does it lead to? Coups and counter-coups, and eventually conflict and wars. But we just imagine this will not be the turn that those three states' experience will be.
All right. But, Prof, I hear that withdrawing is easy, but coming back is not automatic any longer. Could that be the reason ECOWAS has given these countries 6 months to think it through, so they do not go through the rigorous process of rejoining the bloc? Could their withdrawal have reputational consequences for ECOWAS? And I'd also like to know if you saw this coming.
I never saw it coming, but I'm not also surprised. And of course, in global international diplomacy, sometimes you do not bother much about ego, about putative pride, or some kind of prestige. Those things have a way of petering out with time. What ECOWAS is doing is not to show that it's not a sign of weakness or a sign of being Lilliputians, that they're probably just trying to diminish themselves. I think it's just a matter of maturity, a matter of demonstrating that we recognize that you still remain our brothers, even though you are disagreeing with us. And there cannot be any end to the demonstration of maturity. There cannot be end to diplomacy. It's just that you can also decide to be smart in diplomacy. Diplomacy has different variations. Sometimes you can resort to gunboat. Sometimes it can be subtle. There are different dimensions of it. What I think ECOWAS will be doing in the future is to vary their approach to resolving this crisis, also bringing back, these three outliers, outliers in terms of countries, really, and I see them pursuing this route, really, because the part of physical conflict, the part of war, is not a part that will pay anybody, which is why 45 years, for instance, after the end of the Second World War, we haven't had any other kind of war, despite close shaves that we have had, because nations have never profited from war. Nations, have only succeeded in writing their histories, at great cost, faced with war. And no region, no country will prioritize that over peace, And of course, peace is priceless. There's nothing can be too much, to drive at peace.
And Prof, I asked if you saw this coming. I asked if you saw this coming because many had expected the leaders of these three countries to have returned to the bloc, especially because these are still struggling countries. How will you describe that option for the countries involved? Do you think it's in their best interest? And I'm asking because concerned stakeholders like yourself won't stop saying a withdrawal would neither be good for them nor for ECOWAS. And I know that in international diplomacy today, strength lies in numbers. And some say if we remain 15 member states, influence in international diplomacy is greater. If they leave, ECOWAS will be weakened. This is something the bloc must consider. Isn't it, Prof?
Yeah, it's actually concerning, but not especially worrisome. When we want to talk about numbers, we have seen situations where countries are not more than 5 coming together, and they have done very well. ECOWAS is not the only regional bloc that we have in Africa. There is the East African region. There's one in East Africa. There's another one in Southern Africa. And I doubt if their numbers in both cases are up to the 15-member ECOWAS nation as it then was. So if 3 are pulling out on the ground of recalcitrance, on something, just because we know, for a reason that we know is obviously wrong, it's probably also a lesson for ECOWAS, the remaining countries in ECOWAS, to strengthen their union, and to be much more focused on their protocol. And one protocol is one prime point in ECOWAS protocol is the deepening of democracy. What about nations within the West African region, the remaining countries in ECOWAS, that are still trying our democracy, that are still challenged, by the crisis of legitimacy? What are they going to do to strengthen it and to give a picture of a transparent, credible democracy that is characterized with integrity? All these things should rather be their focus, because these 3 countries that are exiting have also given reasons. I've also cited examples of how coups have been happening in other ECOWAS countries. Coups may not necessarily be seen again in the light of military takeover. It can be a constitutional coup. It can as well be an electoral coup, not just military takeover. These three existing countries have referred to constitutional coups in the West African sub-region. They have also referred to electoral coups, directly or indirectly. So what the message it is sending is for the remaining countries in West Africa, to strengthen their democracy, ensure that constitutional coups become a thing of the past, ensure that electoral coups, so to say, become a thing of the past. And what do we mean when we talk about electoral coup? We're simply saying elections that are frauds with irregularities that fail to meet the test of what an ideal election should be, and the test of transparency, the test of credibility, and the test of integrity. And when we talk about constitutional coup, what are we talking about? Changes in government that does not meet, the ideal constitutional requirements, where there are tenure elongation, undue tenure elongation, changes in constitution just to suit the government or a particular person in power. These are the questions that ECOWAS will also need to ask and respond to appropriately, so that, naysayers, or people who want to take undue advantage of these imperfections, are prevented, like Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger are trying to do. Otherwise, I don't think ECOWAS should shirk its elevated responsibility of trying to sustain the art of diplomacy, insofar as it is not duplicitous. If it is elegant diplomacy the way we know it, I think it is the right way to go, really.
All right. So, Prof, earlier you talked about the kind of crisis this may portend for these countries. So let's break it down, because if you look at the amount of trade creation, diversion and trade effects generated through the removal of tariffs on imported goods, expectedly there should be, or there would be, a shortfall. For instance, Niger, among its counterparts, generated $49.9 million from trade creation due to ECOWAS policies, providing new opportunities for trade within the country, and Nigeria being its closest partner in the region. On the other hand, Burkina Faso generated $4.2 million trade through the removal of tariffs on import goods. Nigeria also ranks second for total trade effect due to the removal of these tariffs. Now, all of these figures are expected to go down. Do you foresee more economic crisis in the sub-region as a result of this?
Yeah, no doubt some of these variables will come into play, but remember also that the three countries are smart enough to say that free movement will still be guaranteed, that other West African countries are still free to come into their territories, as the case could be, as it was prior to their exited, but of course at the level of economy you expect that, there will be some disadvantages like you have rightly highlighted. Remember again that these countries are also dealing with the question of being landlocked. We know the disadvantages of being a landlocked country, so yes, there will be losses on both sides, but I dare say that the losses will be more on the part of these countries than on our part, on the part of the remaining countries. They are probably also trying to take advantage of the support they are getting from the East, principally from Russia, but we also know the role of Russia, how Russia's influence is declining in global affairs. They are also strained, hemmed in with their continuous intractable war with Ukraine, which has actually been very draining. We know the effect that is having, and against that background, we know there's a limitation or an extent to which they can continuously support these three countries. So saying that they want to continuously be military also isolates them further, from the much more helpful Western institutions and countries, so that eventually they'll be losing a lot, from these other countries, and we are likely to get sympathy from these Western institutions too, irrespective of their own limitations in supporting countries on the African continent. Yes, there will be minuses and pluses on all the sides, but I think that the disadvantage is going to be more on their side than on the rest of us.
Unfortunately, Prof, the decision of the three countries to leave ECOWAS will significantly impact their trading partners for a long time. And another question is, just three nations at the table, to what extent can they thrive and have economic independence, considering their landlocked area? But Prof, is this ECOWAS giving up too early? And I put it that way because just about last year, the three Francophone countries accused ECOWAS of unfairness, injustice and intolerance since their suspension, and noticeably also their withdrawal was, and is still gradually having significant repercussion on the stability of the region. Was there enough effort on the part of the ECOWAS to bring them back?
Yeah, I don't think that ECOWAS has actually given up. Regimes come and go, administrations come and go, governments come and go. And that's why I said earlier that the action is not something that is sustainable. We can have different sets of governments in the respective countries tomorrow or the day after, next week or next month, and rethinking things through, redefining positions and coming back and forth, within the, for the benefit of ECOWAS, So, but it's difficult for me to just imagine anything else that ECOWAS could do in this circumstance, other than diplomacy. And being diplomatic sometimes does not mean that you are weak. It just shows that you are demonstrating the higher level of wisdom and a limited level of intelligence, And of course, if we have 13 or 12 other African countries coming together and say, okay, this is a step that we're going to take, which is that to give them a long rope to pull, and they are saying, no, yeah, what more can we do? So, yeah, I think there will be a rethink on their part. It's just a matter of regime change, and regime change in a military regime is highly unpredictable, highly dangerous, fraught with anxiety, and that's why the actions stand condemnable. It's not justiciable, it is immoral, it's negligent of the collective will and aspirations of African people, particularly the West African region.
The window for the three nations to reconsider their decision will close in July 2025, 6 months after the official exit. And ECOWAS will now permanently remove their names from its list. I mean, it only means that what will be left for the regional bloc is how to avoid losing other members in the future. The alliance of Sahel states may not be fully there yet, but you may want to agree with me that its presence is capable of influencing other Sahel states like Chad, Mauritania, to become members. For instance, AS is a sub-regional bloc that talks about a primary focus on strategic cooperation and economic growth within the Sahel region. Also, we've seen the military governments supporting each other against ECOWAS sanctions. Are you worried that this disagreement may open more doors for other regional member states currently under military rule to join AES, able to exercise their military power?
Yeah, I don't think that we will rest on our hours. We'll just continue them to ride the rough shots, traveling on the dangerous path that they are traveling. I want to believe that West African efforts will not solely be focused on these three countries. We also have relationships with some of these countries that you mentioned, and of course we will be talking to them, trying to befriend them. And remember that one main characteristic of African countries is heterogeneity. There are different tribes and religions and cultures and customs, embedded within the continent, and even much more so in the West African and Central African sub-regions. Remember, we're also products of colonial powers, English, French, and Portuguese, which brings about substantial differentiations. So homogenizing us at the level of imagining that these three countries can befriend other countries just to spite us may not be that easy, because we are much more, the remaining countries are much more. They should also step up efforts in trying to befriend these other countries that they are likely to go to. But remember again that these three countries are trying even much more, to gain legitimacy, to stabilize and sustain their stay. So that's going to be much more preoccupying, for them. A difficult thing to do, considering the unpredictability of their reign, and of course the restlessness of the peoples and the problems they are having in terms of the jihadists' continuous disturbance of their identities and all of that. Those things are going to be much more preoccupying, and they're going to lack the ability, for sustained elegant diplomacy in the manner in which I imagine other countries remaining in ECOWAS will be able to do.
All right, Prof, thank you very much for your perspectives tonight. It's been interesting having this conversation with you. Professor of Communication Studies, Bayes University, Abiodun Adeniyi. Thank you so much for joining us, Prof.
Thank you.
And thank you very much for watching, everyone. That marks the end of tonight's episode of Politics Tonight. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. I'll see you again tomorrow.